Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the United States of America. We have lots of very important statements. The US will not give money to Kyiv until Zelensky comes to Washington in peace. That was stated by the US Secretary of Commerce. Speaker of the House of Representatives Johnson's following Senator Graham said that either Zelensky will come out of his insane state and listen to what he is told in Washington, or he should resign. Waltz directly stated that US needs a leader in Kyiv with whom it is possible to do business, a thick hint that Zelensky is no longer needed for doing business. Another important statement made by Marco Rubio. Zelensky was repeatedly told that peace should come first and then discussions about security guarantees. Case statements from the US Secretary of State. Most European countries currently have no plan for resolving the conflict in Ukraine. The US views Zelensky's actions in the White House as an attempt to disrupt Trump's administration's effort to resolve the war in Ukraine, basically to save Ukraine. Since the incident in the Oval Office, the Trump administration has not communicated with Zelensky or other Ukrainian officials. So those were the statements made by the US officials. Now let's discuss the statements that were made by the European leaders, by Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and Zelensky himself. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer wants to enforce a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine and back it with the boots on the ground and planes in the air. Europe must do heavy lifting, he says, but the agreement needs US backing, he continues. Let me clear, we agree with Trump on the urgent need for a durable peace. Now we need to deliver it together. Another important statement made by Keir Starmer. Right now, the Ukraine summit is taking place in London, where the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer is speaking, making a number of statements. The European Union will not recognize agreements like Minsk. We will send troops to Ukraine to protect the implementation of the peace agreement. The agreement must include the Russian Federation, but Russia cannot dictate the terms. It will be included in the deal at the last moment. So you know that something like this we used to hear from Zelensky in the summer of 2024, when he was trying to make a peace summit, and he was also trying to make a deal and then to include Russia in that deal, but we remember that everything went wrong. The supply of weapons to Ukraine will continue both during the conflict and after. He also said that he is going to meet with Trump again to discuss a future peace agreement. So as you can see, one of the most important demands from the Russian side is to reduce the number of forces, the number of troops of the armed forces of Ukraine. But we see that the United Kingdom has completely different approach and completely different understanding of the situation. In his speech, he paid special attention to the role of peacekeepers, which Britain and France are working on sending. According to Starmer's plan, peacekeepers are planned to be deployed after the conclusion of a peace agreement, and the arming of Ukraine will continue, which hints at one simple thing. Ukraine is going to be pumped with weapons behind the backs of European peacekeepers. Obviously, this is something that the Russian Federation is not going to accept ever. Another important statements were made by Zelensky. An agreement to end the war is still very, very far away. That was stated by Zelensky. Nobody has started this yet, he added. Zelensky also rejected territorial concessions he needs, for which on the part of Ukraine was stated today by Trump's advisor. Ukraine is still ready to sign a raw materials deal with the Americans. Western support for Ukraine will continue. Zelensky again made it clear that he is not going to resign. This is very important. He said that it would be very difficult to replace him. It's not enough to simply hold elections. They should not allow me to participate, and this will be a little more difficult because they still need to negotiate with me. So as we can see, Zelensky wants to have something in exchange. This is how the Ukrainian president commented on today's statements by Waltz and Johnson, those statements we discussed 5 minutes ago, who hinted that the United States is in favor of replacing Zelensky if he does not agree to a peaceful settlement settlement. Zelensky added that he is ready to exchange his resignation for Ukraine's administration, admission to NATO, the presence of Western troops at sea, on land, and in the sky can be considered as a security guarantee. Before leaving the United Kingdom, he said that his relations with Trump would continue, and this is according to him. We don't think that this is the same, that Donald Trump has the same position. Also, as a result of this meeting, the United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer has announced 1.6 billion in anti-aircraft missiles for Ukraine. The European Union and the United Kingdom are planning to purchase over 5,000 anti-aircraft missiles. One thing we need to understand that this is not something that is going to happen tomorrow or the day after. The entire European Union doesn't have this amount of missiles, and obviously it will take time. Furthermore, Zelensky met with King Charles, and furthermore he had lots of talks with different politicals. The most important part probably came after the meeting, because we have a lot of different statements. For example, from the Secretary General of NATO. He said that the meeting went very well with European countries, increasing their spending both for their own needs and for support of Ukraine. Also, he stated that we must prepare for the moment when a ceasefire is declared in Ukraine and guard the peace. That was also stated by Rutte. Maybe the special military operation is going to be ended very soon, but something tells me that this is not going to be until the Western countries will accept the Russia's demands. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground, and let's discuss the situation in Ukraine. According to information we have, there are very heavy clashes on the territory of Sudzha direction. Yes, so during the previous day, there were almost nothing from this area, because the Russians during the previous week managed to improve their position significantly right before the meetings and talks with Trump. Then the Russians had a small operational pause. Now the Russians are about to finish their regrouping, and they will begin another wave of offensive right before the European summit that is going to take place on the 6th of March. As for the current situation, we see the following configuration. The Russians managed to establish complete FPV drone control over the main supply road between the settlement of Sudzha and the settlement of Sumy. Everything that goes along these roads is being destroyed by the Russians without any problems. The losses from the Ukrainian side are much higher than 33%, maybe up to 66 or 70% of everything that Ukrainians try to send through this road is being can be destroyed by the Russians, and these losses are very heavy. Furthermore, the Russians established another complete control over another supply road that Ukrainians use, and this is the road between the settlements of Miropolye, Garnal, and Guiva. Today we have another video. In this video we can see few vehicles from the armed force of Ukraine that were moving from the area of Sumy toward the settlement of Guiva, or maybe the Ukrainians were planning to move even further towards the city of Sudzha, but the Ukrainian vehicles were ambushed and destroyed. So every single road that Ukrainians used to have to supply their forces in Sudzha is already under complete Russian fire control. Furthermore, today we got first geolocation from the Sumy region that was published by the Ukrainian side that confirms Russian control on the Ukrainian side of the border. In this video we can see FPV drone attack on the Russian vehicle that was moving exactly in this point. Based on this video we have adjusted a small part of Sumy region in Russian favor. This territory used to be considered, as you can see, as a contested area or the gray zone. Now we have no doubts that currently the Russians already on the territory of Sumy. Furthermore, today different pro-Russian mappers additionally confirmed Russian control over the settlement of Novinky, at least over the northern part. So we see that the Russians continue advancing. As for now, it's very difficult to understand what the Russians are going to do next, because the weather is not so comfortable to carry out offensive operations due to heavy losses the Russians may suffer, but obviously the Russians can move very slowly, step by step, in the southern direction. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates from the northern part, from the settlement of Loknya. Today, different sources, including pro-Ukrainian sources, confirmed that the settlement of Pogribki and the northern part of Nova Sarachina was completely secured and cleared by the Russians. So basically, the pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed maps that we can see almost on every single mapper. Furthermore, the Russian sources published the video from the most northern part. The 22nd Regiment detachment of the armed force of Russian Federation raised the Russian flag almost in the most northern part of the village, which means that the reports that we got yesterday, the day before yesterday, about Russian control over the settlement of Novosorochina most likely were correct. Furthermore, the sources reported that currently the Russians are trying to advance along the railways in the southern direction, trying to get the Ukrainians in the settlement of Mala Loknya from the north. Anyway, before the 6th of March, before the European summit, there are going to be very heavy clashes, and the main purpose of the Russians would be to cut these silent and to force the Ukrainians to fall back towards the settlement of Mala Kazachia Loknya. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the north in Kupiansk direction. Today the sources reported, mainly the pro-Ukrainians and mainly the neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians, as a result of counter-offensive operation, managed to restore control over the tree lines, over the forest fields, some constructions to the southwest of Sinkovka. So this territory used to be under complete Russian control. I remind you that somewhere in the end of December the Russians managed to answer the city of Kupiansk, and there were very heavy clashes in the northwestern part. Then the Russians were forced to fall back and to abandon some positions, and they tried to dig in deeper on the northeastern outskirts. But now we see that Ukrainians most likely counterattacked and forced the Russians to fall back. The main purpose of this counterattack from the Ukrainian side is to move along the river of Oskol with the purpose to cut Russian supply and support on the Ukrainian side of the river. Most likely the Ukraine will continue offensive operation in the direction of Liman Pershi, in the direction of the settlement of Sinkovka from the north, with the purpose to cut the Russians on the Ukrainian side of the river. And if Ukrainians are able to finish this offensive operation successful, most likely we should expect several more attempts from the Ukrainian side to attack in the direction of Zapadne, and most likely the Ukrainians will try to counter-attack in the area of Dvorichne with the purpose to force the Russians to fall back. Obviously, very heavy clashes are going to take place in this area in the very near future. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the central Kupiansk direction. Today, according to information we have, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, as a result of offensive operation, the Russians managed to improve their positions and to take several positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in the village of Zagryzovo. Basically, and according to the report that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, we can make a conclusion that the settlement of Zagryzovo was caught in pincers by the armed forces of Russian Federation. The Ukrainians were encircled from the west and from the east. There's just one road which most likely is also under complete Russian FPV drone control. Most likely in the very near future the Russians will begin their major offensive with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back completely towards the settlement of Boguslavka. Furthermore, the Russians began or resumed their offensive operation on the line between the settlements Stepi, Kopanki, Nadia, and Raigorodka. This information was provided us by pro-Ukrainian sources. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupiansk direction. Today, also according to different mappers, the Russians managed to secure the forest between Yampolovka and Taritskoye and to establish complete control. So we see that the Kupiansk direction is pretty active these days, and then reminded that several days ago the commander-in-chief, the chief of the general staff of the armed forces of Russian Federation, Valery Gerasimov, visited the area of responsibilities of the group of forces west, probably providing them additional orders and additional tasks for future. So which means that most likely the group of forces west began implementing the tasks and orders received from the head of Russian army. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Toretsk. Today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to improve their positions after a successful Ukrainian counterattack. In this video, we can see the central citadel of the city of Toretsk, which partly was taken by the Ukrainians during their counterattack. And in this video, we can see how the Russians were trying to reduce to ruins another building that was captured by the Ukrainians during this attack. So we see that the Russians now have some problems with the Ukrainians that managed to enter the central part. Now they need to waste resources and time with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area once again. As for the Pokrovsk direction, we have a lot of very interesting updates. Today, pro-Ukrainian sources confirmed that the Russians, as a result of number of counterattacks, managed to restore the control over the settlement of Pyschanek completely. At least this information was provided us by pro-Ukrainian sources. And with the fact that the Russians managed to restore control, the Russians furthermore managed to restore supply lines that goes from the settlement of Shevchenko, Pyschanek, and then in the direction of Kotlina and Udachne. And today the Russians began bombing and attacking, probably for the first time since the Russians established control over the railways. The Russians began bombing another industrial zone to the north of Udachne. This is the main base of the armored forces of Ukraine, the main checkpoint, the main stronghold for regrouping before further offensive operations, which means that maybe the Russians in the very near future will try to attack this area. If the Russians can establish control over this industrial zone, this is going to be complete defeat and complete collapse of the Ukrainian lines in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the south Donetsk direction. According to information we have, during the previous nights, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the north of Burlatsk. A few more tree lines and fields and the fortifications were taken by the Russians on their way with the purpose to outflank the settlement of Shevchenko from the east, northeast. So we see that the Russians are trying to maneuver something like this, and the Russians are trying to get as close as possible to the settlement of Vysole and to attack this village from the west as well. So this is what the Russians are trying to complete right now, and most likely the next target of the Russians in this direction is to take everything under control inside of this red line. So everything like villages like Fyodorovka, Vysole and Dnieproenergia are the primary target for the Russians for the next several weeks. And that's it for this short video. Military Summary channel reminds you, we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.